Hi, United in Recovery family. I'm glad to have this chance to continue our Renew series as we've been talking about how we handle change and how we handle the changes in our lives and the ways we need to change. And so if you've been with us the last couple weeks, we talked about how times change. We're often powerless over that. Then we talked about how God doesn't change and how that's good because God's always working on our behalf, seeking to forgive and guide and lead us. And then we talked after that about how you can change, like real change is possible in your life. So times change, God does it, you can. Tonight, we're talking about here's how. Here's how to change. Here's how that actual change can happen. Now that we've recognized that God's in the midst of all our change, and not only does the world change, but we can really change. It's like, well, how does that happen? Because sometimes we want that and we talk about it a lot, especially in recovery, we talk about change a lot. But how does it actually happen? Now, in the 12 steps, what I consider the change steps are really steps 4 through 7. And this is where we don't just see a change of thinking or a brief behavioral change like 90 meetings in 90 days. That's a behavioral change, which is a really good one. But by itself, if that's all it is for 90 days, then that's all it is for 90 days, right? Steps 4 through 7 are where we really see transformation. So let's talk about how that happens and also talk about the fact that steps 4 through 7 are all about dealing with our stuff inside. And you'll notice, isn't it interesting that all of this comes before the steps that deal with our outside relationships, 8 and 9, where we talk about making amends. And there's a good reason for that. In fact, in Matthew's gospel, in the 7th chapter, the 21st verse, this is part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he says something really interesting that's really troubling, but I think those of us who know the 12 steps can understand a lot better than most exactly what Jesus is talking about here. In this verse, he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father. Now, as folks growing up in church, we're like, well, we were taught to call Jesus Lord. We said, if you believe he's Lord, hey, that's enough, right? Well, what's he saying here? Where not everybody who calls me Lord, Lord. He's saying, if all you ever do is come to me just because you want me to forgive you and make everything okay, but you don't actually want change, then you don't actually want me to be your Lord, right? You don't actually want me to be your God. You want to be my God, and you want to tell me what I should do for you, but you actually don't want me to be your Lord. If you wanted me to be your Lord, you would want to do the will of my Father. Now, what's the will of God the Father? The will of God the Father is that we are inwardly transformed into the likeness of Christ, right? That we might say in our regular language, so that throughout our lives, we become more and more like Jesus, more and more able to love like Jesus, to think like Jesus, to see like Jesus. And we never get there perfectly, but we become more like that in this life. That's God's will for all of us. And in our relationships, the reason we need to work these transformation steps is because if you go and you try to make amends, and it's just a physical amend you're making, and you haven't done the internal work, well, that doesn't really mean that much. Really, then, we're just kind of paying people off to try and take some of our guilt away, and in some cases, to get them to forgive us, right? Well, that's not what amends are about at all. The greatest amend we make is the internal transformation of becoming a different person. So we always do that before we try to make any concrete amends. Otherwise, they just don't mean much. So let's talk about these steps, and then I'm going to give you one thing to think about to help continue your journey of transformation tonight. So step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory. Step 5, shared that with someone. Step 6, became willing for God to remove all my character defects and shortcomings. And step 7, asked God to do so, prayed to God to do so. What do you hear in there? I mean, we could focus on a lot of different things in there, and it really depends on where you're at right now in your journey. If you're at step 4, a lot of people get stuck there, and there are a lot of reasons, and you need to do that moral inventory, but you also need to do it in a way that brings out the good and the bad of how you've been in your life, how God's been at work in your life, how you've run from God sometimes. That step 5, that finding somebody to talk to, that's crucial. Step 6, I honestly think it's not one we talk about all the time. I think it's one of the hardest steps, actually becoming willing for God to remove everything, because we've lived with these compulsions for so long. We've become real attached to them and comfortable. So there's a lot in all of that. And wherever you are in all of that tonight, I'd encourage you in your open share groups to talk to those who are right there. And I think that will lead to some deep conversation. But here's what I want you to think about. What's one thing, if there could just be one thing different about your life tomorrow versus today, what would you want it to be? Would you want to have more compassion for others? Would you want to have more of a sense of peace as you go through difficulty? Would you like to not be so greedy? What's one thing internally that you'd like to be different? Just one. And then what's the one thing you can do tonight to start moving in that direction? What's the one thing you'd like to be different? What's the one thing you could do tonight? One little thing just to take a step in that direction. And that might be a good place to start out in your open share groups talking about. If you're joining us online, not able to be part of an open share group, I'd encourage you to journal. I'd encourage you to get out a pen and paper, write down that thing, write down what you'd like to be different, and then write down somebody you're going to call and talk to about it, so that it's not just you, so that you have somebody else out there helping you. Maybe you have a sponsor, maybe you don't have a formal relationship like that, but you've got a good friend or an accountability partner who can help you. What's one thing you'd like to be different? What's one thing you can do? God bless you, and I hope to get to see you in person very, very soon. Take care.